The first time I saw the shortcut on the map, it looked harmless enough. A thin, dotted line cutting straight through the woods, promising to shave an hour off our hike back to camp. We'd spent the whole day exploring a ridge above the valley, where the air smelled like pine needles and the sky seemed close enough to touch. But now the sun was slipping low, painting everything in gold and shadow, and none of us wanted to be caught on the trail after dark. "It's just a deer path," Mark said, squinting down at his compass. "Cuts right through to the main trail." The rest of us, Sarah, Jeff and I, were tired enough to believe him, so we stepped off the familiar route and into the undergrowth. At first, it wasn't bad. The trail wound gently between stands of birch and spruce, the forest floor soft with old leaves. The air cooled quickly as the sun dropped, and for a while we could still see the warm glow of daylight through the trees ahead. We joked, talked about dinner, beans and cornbread waiting back at camp, and even sang a little to keep spirits up. But after 20 minutes or so, the path began to twist strangely, looping back toward where we'd come from. "Wait!" Sarah said, pointing at a broken branch. "Didn't we pass that earlier?" I shrugged it off. Forests play tricks on your eyes, trees all start to look the same after a while. Still, something about it felt off. The forest grew denser, the light dimmer. A cool wind carried the smell of damp earth and pine sap. Jeff tried to use his GPS watch, but the trees were too thick, blocking the signal. "Compass says west," Mark muttered, spinning it in his hand. We kept going that way, but the slope we'd been descending started rising again. Another half hour later, we crossed a shallow stream, and I froze. A boot print in the mud, right next to mine, half washed, but fresh. The tread matched my own boot. We'd already been here. "Are you saying we're going in circles?" Jeff asked, his voice half laughing, half worried. "No way," I said. But even as I said it, I looked around and realised the woods were unnervingly quiet. No birds, no wind now, just the slow, constant creak of the trees shifting in the evening air. And the feeling, like the forest itself was closing in, settled heavy in my chest. The shortcut, it seemed, wasn't much of a shortcut after all. We stopped to regroup near a moss-covered log, breathing hard, the last bit of sunlight dying behind the trees. I could feel the temperature dropping quickly. The forest around us seemed to shift colours as the light faded, the greens turning to deep grey and the trunks of the birches pale as bones. "All right," Mark said, trying to sound confident. "We'll just backtrack to the stream, then follow it downhill. Water always leads somewhere." It sounded reasonable, but the unease in his voice didn't match the plan. We'd all heard stories, hikers getting lost within, sight of camp, search teams finding them only a mile away days later. Still, doing nothing felt worse, so we turned around and followed the trickle of water through the dimming woods. After 10 minutes, the stream split into two channels, one veering left, the other right. We argued quietly, our voices low, as if afraid of disturbing something in the forest. "Left looks wider," Sarah said. "Right feels downhill," Jeff countered. We finally went right, trusting gravity more than guesswork. But a few minutes later, the water disappeared into the ground altogether, vanishing into a patch of ferns. That's when the forest went utterly silent. No frogs, no insects, nothing. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. "I don't like this," Sarah whispered. Her flashlight beam wobbled over the trunks, illuminating patches of bark that all looked strangely familiar. "We've been through here. I swear we have." I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but the truth sat heavy in my gut. The trees did look familiar. One had a distinct scar of missing bark shaped like a lightning bolt, and I could have sworn I'd seen it before. Jeff climbed a small rise to get his bearings, but the terrain looked endless. Trees in every direction, no sign of trail markers or ridgelines. The forest had swallowed us whole. "We just need to keep calm," Mark said. He tried to sound steady, but his voice cracked slightly. He checked his compass again, then frowned. "That can't be right." The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. We all watched in silence as it drifted, directionless. The last light faded from the sky, and the forest turned black. The shortcut had turned on us, twisting and shifting like a maze that didn't want to let us go. I lit my headlamp, its weak yellow beam cutting a small hole in the darkness. Around us, shadows gathered thick between the trees, and for the first time I realised we might not make it back before full dark. That was when Sarah whispered, "Do you hear that?" We froze. Somewhere in the distance, faint, rhythmic, came the sound of footsteps on dry leaves. Not close, but not far either, just steady enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. At first, I thought it was just an echo. One of us shifting our weight or crunching twigs, but the rhythm was wrong. Too even, too deliberate. The sound came from beyond the reach of our lights, out there in the black spaces between the trees. We all froze, listening. The footsteps paused when we did. Then, a few heartbeats later, they started again, slow and steady, as though whoever or whatever it was wanted us to know it was there. "Probably a deer," Jeff whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Or an elk." But even he didn't sound convinced. Deer don't match their pace to yours. "Let's keep moving," Mark said quietly. "We'll stay close and keep heading downhill." The others nodded, and we started walking again. Slow, careful steps, trying not to make too much noise. The forest floor was soft with layers of damp leaves, each footfall muffled. My flashlight beam darted from trunk to trunk, never landing long enough to feel safe. I could feel my pulse in my ears, hear the faint rasp of Sarah's breathing just behind me. Every so often, the unseen footsteps echoed faintly again, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. It was impossible to tell the distance in the dark. We must have walked for another hour, though it felt longer. The night grew colder, our breath misting in the beam of our lights. I could see the worry deepening on everyone's faces. "Mark," I said finally, "how long have we been going downhill?" He checked his compass again, still spinning. He muttered something under his breath, a word I didn't catch, and then said, "Let's stop for a second." We gathered in a tight circle, our headlamps casting overlapping rings of yellow light. Beyond that glow, the woods looked endless and still. Then Jeff gasped. "Look!" He was pointing at a tree just a few feet ahead of us, a tall birch with a patch of bark missing in the shape of a lightning bolt, the same tree we'd passed before. My stomach sank. "No way," Sarah whispered. "We can't be here again. We've been walking straight." But there it was, proof we hadn't moved forward at all. Somehow the forest had bent around us. For the first time, I felt real fear, a deep, quiet kind that makes you want to whisper, so the dark won't hear you. "Maybe we should just stay put," I said. "Build a fire, wait for daylight." Mark nodded reluctantly, rubbing his hands together for warmth. We gathered what deadwood we could find and got a small fire going. The flame threw long, shaky shadows across the trees, the smoke rising in lazy curls. But even with the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every snap of a branch in the distance made us glance up. Every shift of the fire's shadow made us flinch. The forest was no longer just a backdrop. It felt alive, listening, waiting. And as we huddled closer to the fire, I realised something that made my blood run cold. The footsteps had stopped. Whatever had been out there wasn't moving anymore. It was just waiting too. The fire gave off more smoke than heat, and every gust of wind made it flicker low enough to show how dark the woods truly were beyond its ring of light. Sarah sat close to me, her knees pulled up to her chest, the glow painting her face pale and hollow. Jeff was trying to joke, something about how this would make a great story later, but his laugh came out thin and nervous. Mark just kept feeding the fire, staring into it like he could will it to burn brighter. None of us wanted to admit what we were thinking, that maybe the forest didn't want us to leave. After a while, the quiet grew unbearable. "We're fine," Mark said, mostly to himself. "At first light, we'll find our bearings, no problem." He tossed another branch onto the flames. The fire popped loudly, scattering sparks that floated up like tiny stars before vanishing into the dark. That's when I caught it again, the faint crunch of leaves far off but distinct. I turned my head, my heart hammering. Jeff heard it too. I saw his eyes dart to the same patch of darkness. It came once, then again, slow and unhurried. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They knew exactly where we were. Mark grabbed the hatchet from his pack, his face tense. "Could be a raccoon," he said, though no one believed it. We waited, every sound magnified by fear. The crackle of firewood, the wind sighing through branches, our own ragged breathing. Minutes stretched into an hour. The noise didn't return, but none of us could relax. Sarah eventually whispered, "I think we should take turns keeping watch." So we did, each of us sitting up by the fire while the others tried to rest. But even half asleep, I could feel that tension under my skin, like the forest itself was holding its breath. When it was my turn, the night had gone ink black. Clouds covered the stars, and even the treetops were invisible. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, painting the ground in soft red light. I sat listening, the crack of settling wood, the occasional hoot of an owl, the sigh of wind through leaves. Then, just on the edge of hearing, I caught a new sound, something brushing against bark, slow and deliberate, like a hand dragging along a tree trunk. My mouth went dry. I turned my light toward the sound, but the beam caught only mist and trunks that looked too close together. Nothing moved. Then, faint but unmistakable, I saw it. Two tiny reflections, like eyes catching the firelight, staring from between the trees. They didn't blink, didn't shift, just watched. For a long moment, neither did I. And then, as if deciding it had seen enough, the reflections turned and vanished deeper into the woods, swallowed by blackness. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but in my gut I knew whatever it was had been standing too high off the ground to be anything on four legs. I didn't wake the others. I just fed the fire and sat in silence, waiting for dawn that seemed determined not to come. When dawn finally broke, it came grey and thin through the trees, a light more like smoke than sunlight. The forest was quiet again, eerily so. The fire had burned itself down to a crust of white ash, and my breath fogged in the chill morning air. Sarah stirred first, rubbing her eyes, her face drawn and pale. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. I just shook my head. There wasn't much to say. Mark stretched stiffly, glancing around as though the forest might look different now that the night was gone. It didn't. The same trees, the same undergrowth, the same suffocating stillness. Yet in the daylight, the fear of the night seemed almost ridiculous. Almost. We packed our things slowly, careful not to look too far into the shadows. Mark checked his compass again. It finally pointed true. "All right," he said with forced confidence. "Northwest. That'll take us back toward camp." We started walking, retracing what we thought might be our path. The morning light was weak but steady, filtering through the canopy and catching on dew-soaked spiderwebs. It was beautiful, in a strange, haunting way. Still, none of us spoke much. Each step felt cautious, like we might somehow break the fragile spell that was letting us out. After maybe half an hour, the trees began to thin. We started recognizing things. A fallen log we'd crossed yesterday, a patch of ferns flattened from our boots. Then, all at once, the forest opened up, and there it was. The main trail, broad and familiar, sunlight spilling across it like an invitation home. Relief hit us all at once. Sarah laughed, a little hysterically, and even Mark cracked a grin. We stood there for a while, just breathing, as though we'd stepped out of some strange dream. By the time we made it back to camp, the sun was high, and the smell of breakfast from a neighbouring site carried on the breeze. Everything felt normal again, our tents still standing, the world calm and ordinary. But when Jeff unpacked his gear, he froze. "Hey," he said quietly. We all turned to look. Clinging to the back of his pack, woven into the mesh pocket, was a single strand of moss, long, pale, and twisted into a perfect little loop. A ring. It didn't look like something that had just snagged there. It looked placed. None of us said anything for a long time. Eventually, Mark gave a shaky laugh and muttered, "Guess the forest didn't want us to forget." That night, as the fire crackled and the stars came out above camp, I found myself glancing toward the dark tree line more than once. The woods looked peaceful, almost inviting, but I knew better now. Sometimes a shortcut isn't just a path through the trees, sometimes it's a test. And if you're lucky, the forest lets you find your way out again.